see if I can adjust this a little bit. Good morning. Well, good morning for me. I don't know what time it is where you are. So we're going to get started, and I don't really have any particular monologue. I'm happy to scratch where you itch to try to answer whatever your questions are, help you work through whatever. A number of you have put in some questions where I said, okay, if I do a live stream, what would you like to talk about? I did that before the Trump thing. I don't know if you want to talk about the Trump thing or if you want to talk about the IL 76 or if you want to talk about something else. I was looking at some interesting things here before, just before I put the live stream on, and the strangest one of these was that there's a pro-Putin rally that was scheduled to be held in Washington, D.C. on the second anniversary of the invasion. It was canceled by its organizers, presumably, according to the tweet, because they couldn't raise enough money to fund it. And that raised an interesting thought to my mind, and that is that there's okay. So with the first question that I had, I'm tying these together. The first question that I had on the comments when I was asking, what do you want to talk about tomorrow, was what Americans and American allies think about the U.S. after they promised to stand with Ukraine. I think Americans just aren't thinking that hard. I think that's the reality. When it comes to Ukraine, I think there are people like Greg and myself that are very, pro-Ukraine. There are others that are, um, hey, look, this is wrong. We need to stand with Ukraine. And then there are people that just don't really care. And then there are people that are not Ukraine, but it's really just not that big of an issue. And then there are people that are opposed to Ukraine, and it looks like they're pro-Russia, but they're really not pro-Russia, but they've believed a bunch of I want to say propaganda, but I can't find any other term that fits better. They believed a bunch of things that were said about Ukraine. Oh, Ukraine is this dark, corrupt place, or whatever Tucker Carlson repeated, or that kind of thing. And it's really interesting that I see fundraisers and things like that for Ukraine all the time. I haven't stumbled upon any pro-Russian fundraisers. I mean, does that make sense? Like, there's nobody that's on the Russian side of the spectrum that I've seen. Like, I drive down the street and I will see a house with a Ukraine flag. I'll see a car with a Ukraine sticker. I'll see somebody wearing a T-shirt. And I live in a really conservative place. And yet I have not seen the opposite. So it's kind of interesting to me that this thing washed out. I think it would have been terrible, but that it washed out because there wasn't enough enthusiasm. But not enough enthusiasm cuts the other direction too. We need the enthusiasm of people that are willing to make the stand and try to, really go to bat for Ukraine as well. It's really an odd thing. Like, there's really not a pro-Russia party. There is a when I say party, I don't mean political party, like a group behind, like, go Russia. I mean, there could be somewhere, but it's not large and it's not very public if it is. Yeah, to explain, you see pro-Hamas and pro-Israel demonstrations. You don't really see a lot of pro-Russian sentiment in that way. Yeah, there's been some that have been public, but it's not nearly the same. Anyway, I'm not saying that it's not out there. I'm saying scale of it is significantly different. That was the first thing that grabbed me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer your questions at as the last one that's come in. So if you put a question in, feel free to cut and paste it and then pop it in again if you whatever. I'm not ditching anybody. I'll try to answer whatever it is that is within my scope of competence. And like so, if you're asking about, well, how does a SAM 300 different from a SAM 400? I'm probably not the guy, and I'm more than happy to admit my ignorance when I'm ignorant about something. Okay. Ben says, why can Russia use Iranian and North Korean arms in Ukraine? Yet Ukraine can't even use Western arms on Russian targets. Will this change? Okay. Um, Jonathan Fink and I were talking 3 days ago, 2 days ago, 3 days ago. We had an interview on Silicon Curtain, and then I interviewed him to ask him questions. And the one on Silicon Curtain, I was talking about how I believe the story of this, when it's written, will be how Putin um, deterred us. Like, don't cross this red line, don't cross that red line. And we started off the conversation because he really wanted to talk about like leadership and what the Biden administration was doing. And well, that made me have to admit right up front I'm a Republican and say, hey, look, I'm not just taking a political swipe at him, but I think his fundamental knee jerk reaction to things is to um, not cause the other side. You like, I'm not going to provoke you uh, in the same way that you could probably charge some Republicans for being maybe too hawkish. He's not been hawkish enough. And so with that, the US has put stipulations. You can't use these weapons to go into Russia, and that's really kind of handicapped. Not anything within Ukraine was fine, but not into Russia, and that was putting a handicap on Ukrainians. Whereas I'm pretty sure the Iranians and the North Koreans weren't thinking anything like that. So what? Go ahead, blow them up. I mean, that's the way that they were thinking of it. Master of None says, if the crisis on the U.S. border is so big, why aren't conservatives taking the deal? Great question. What happens if they don't get such a chance later? That's a great question. Holy cow. That's remarkable. Okay. So why aren't they taking the deal? So it's all politics, unfortunately, and Ukrainians are suffering because of it. So I showed in my three big stories yesterday, I think it was PBS article where the writer was talking about certain things. And like, look, they got the policy worked out. Okay, so I've been maintaining, and I believe that this is the case, that there's a political process that they have to work out. It's messy. It takes longer than we want it to take. It's not just like here's an executive order, go do it, and they've got competing sides. Now, the Republicans, I don't think this was a good idea. I keep maintaining it was not a good idea. Have tried to politically leverage Ukraine assistance to get things fixed on the border. What Trump did at the border was actually putting up the wall, and he was actually, making significant progress. That completely ceased when Biden came into office. The wall, like we have just material that we bought that was sitting there rusting, right? And then there was also a stay in Mexico policy that Biden undid. And so now we have since Biden's come into office, I don't even remember what the figures are. Like just astronomical amounts of flooding over the border. And now we want to deal with the border intelligently. We want immigrants to come in, but we want them to come in through the front door, check out, make sure everything's cool. Okay, go be a productive member of society. We don't want what's actually transpiring, but we haven't had any political will to fix it. Okay. So now they're working out something. They're working out a deal. They've got what I was referencing about yesterday was they've worked out the policy aspects, which is huge. Like when they're making legislation, just agreeing to both sides agreeing to like, okay, here's what we want on this policy, here's what you want on this policy, and now they're just trying to figure out how much money is going to fund each piece of it. Well, then Trump blew this up in the sense of calling members involved with this process and key members of the on the Republican side and leadership saying, no, I don't, we don't want anything but a perfect deal. I don't want this to happen. I'm going to run on this. And if you look, and now that's a big part of this, and to the degree that they listen to him, so Mike Johnson might be more willing to listen to him than the senators. Senators tend to be more immune to what the president wants because they're looking at him thinking, okay, he's going to be here for 4 years. I've been here for 20 and I'm going to be here for another 15 when he's gone. And they don't tend, and they all think that they could be him. So senators tend to deal with the president differently than the House members do. But nonetheless, so Trump wanting to become or to have a deal to run a problem to run on is kind of not cool. And no, it's not kind of not cool. It's just not cool. And then it's messed with this what progress they were making. So they were real close in the sense that they got policy. They're just working out how much is going to what. And then it would go from the Senate over to the House where they would have to work out whatever, and we'll see. But that was a great question where you were asking what happens if they don't get such a chance later. Then the problem festers for another election cycle because I don't think the Biden administration is really going to do anything to solve it. The Biden administration is doing what we're doing right now. Um, and so it festers for another 4 years of hand wringing and anger and whatever else. So that's a great question. I mean, and the plan that they were working on was not perfect, as I understood. The plan would make progress, and that's what you do in politics. You make progress. You don't look for perfection. And in politics, you don't really get credit until you something breaks and then you fix it. If you fix something before it broke, you don't actually get credit. It's like a really backwards way of operating. Like you wouldn't do this in your house. I wouldn't be like, you know what? I'm gonna wait for that. Like I replaced my hot water heater not too long ago. I didn't want to do it, but I didn't wait for it to break and make a huge mess and then go, see, I'm a hero because I fixed the mess. Like, that's not the way to operate in real life. Okay. Anyway, okay. Duh, big cat. I watched Republican reps scream the border is open and refuse to do anything. Okay. Yeah, hold on. On Twitter, I asked what legislation the GOP was proposing, never an answer. Well, that's not necessarily the best place. If you read enough of these articles from The Hill and Politico and Washington Post and whatever, they are making progress. I promise you, they're making progress. But there is a process to this. And I do not buy for a moment that all Republicans or the Republican Party as such just wants to run on this. There are a few MAGA the Republicans that are like that, and Trump has just come out and been like, "Yeah, I want to run with this." Why does he want to run on it? If you look at the New Hampshire primary, you'll see 41%. The biggest issue by far, 41%, was immigration, followed by the economy. Um, Foreign policy, like Ukraine, was a distant 8%. Right? So that's why he wants to run with it. And he ran away with it. Like who voted if that was their primary issue, they went with Trump 71% of the time over Haley. So he wants this issue. I- if Republicans were really thinking and were trying to help Haley, let's say, they would get this issue off the table as quickly as possible to help her be able to run with taking some of the air out of Trump's sails. Okay. Um, yeah. So I don't fall into the trap of believing that they just want to inflame this issue. I don't believe that that's the case. And they're working through it. Okay, Mark Bernard said, so based on the stats, it's the issue's easy to manipulate populace. That's why, yeah, that's why it's big. And that's a really great question or a great statement. Populists are all wound up about it. I mean, like, I think it needs to be fixed, but it's not I don't see it in the same way, like, this isn't some kind of existential thing, like, it is a problem, it's a legit problem, we need to fix the legit problem, but it's not okay. Now, this is n my channel is all about Ukraine. Why are we talking about immigration? Because it is important and it can shape who becomes president and who becomes president, like, I keep seeing comments about, like, "Why does he keep talking about Trump? I thought this was about Ukraine." Well, if Trump becomes president, that has a significant impact on Ukraine. It would be fun to get to a place where it became a Biden-Haley race so I could just talk about Ukraine instead of US presidential politics. Because once you have a Republican and a Republican and a Democrat who both support Ukraine, well, the problem kind of goes away. I mean, we could talk about nuance of how much of this one will support or that one, but it just the problem tends to evaporate. So, okay, so Real Sync said, I don't understand why Elon Musk spread Russian propaganda. I mean, he's not stupid. I don't need money, and still he uses all the Russian talking points. I'm not sure that I understand that either. In the early days of the war, he came out and he was saying, like, pro-Ukrainian kind of things. He even challenged Putin to a fight, and winner takes Ukraine. And like, that might not have been the best idea. Putin does have a legitimate black belt in judo, but yeah, this was just big talk on Twitter. He also provided the Starlink link early in when it looked like everything was gonna be blacked out, and then there was this weird shift, and I don't know what to make of it other than perhaps business interests or maybe the people he was talking to. I don't understand, but, I mean, it's a thing. I was starting to read Paul Ironmonger, "Will the $83 million ruling hurt Trump?" Okay. Um, yes and no. It depends on when. And message retracted. Okay. Well, if you don't want to talk about that, we don't have to talk about that. I'll go on to something else. And if you all want to talk about that, I'll come back to it. Banisher von Count. Do you foresee Russian front lines collapsing? I can't believe that they've lasted as long as they have under terrible conditions. I can. I mean, if you think about the lines, and I did videos about this where I was talking about, like, here's the lines. There's mines, there's dragon teeth, there's trenches, so you can't get over it easily. There's perhaps some kind of wire or something. There's artillery that's zeroed in on people that are coming at you. So I mean, it's a real thing. Like, it's hard to get through, and without combined arms, which they don't have the air power to overwhelm the other side, it's a hard thing for them to get across. It's also a hard thing for the Russians to get across as well. So I saw a stat that less than 1% has changed ground, or of ground has changed hands over 2023. I'm not sure if that's exactly right, but something feels right about that. I mean, I don't know that I have that. I'm not going to stake my reputation on that particular thing, but it's something like that. It's not a lot has changed hands over time. And so, yeah, I mean, without something additional to push through, I don't think it's going to matter a whole lot. Um, Could I give you my opinion on McConnell's actions on the Supreme Court? We've already witnessed hypocrisy at the highest level. Okay. So, William, I am not sure that I know exactly what you're addressing. Can you expand that a little bit? McConnell's actions? We're talking about the Senate Majority Leader. So please help me expand that a little bit, and I'll be happy to answer the question. But with what are you referring to? Because McConnell's actually trying to shepherd things through. Um, if you're talking about him saying, "Look, the politics have changed," that's just politics being politics. But I don't know that. um, I don't know exactly what you're referencing, so I'm happy to speak. All right, Greg Terry's in the house. So um, Greg doesn't know how to rest properly, and he was supposed to take a couple days off and aggressively rest, and so he was still making videos and still doing more things than I do in an average day while he's supposed to be taking time off to gather himself. Uh, so he should be properly chastised for that. Needs to be 100% so he can get back out there and keep doing what he's doing. He's doing some great work out there in Ukraine. Uh, Stop defending GOP, Professor. Just leave with the rest of us and tell them exactly why. So, my goal is to reform my party and bring it back to what it was pre Trump. I'm not defending just to uh, defend or whatever. I'm not just like the funniest comments are when they're like, he's really pro MAGA. No, I'm not really pro MAGA. I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, and I can't jump to the other party because the other party wouldn't have me for multiple reasons. So I'm stuck. I need to reform my party, and I want to reform my party. I mean, the idea that uh, Republicans became doves just sounds so bizarre to me, especially in this kind of climate. I was watching, and I've said this before, but I was watching. I'm trying to remember who it was. Sebastian Gorka talking, I guess it was, and he was talking about he and Mark Levine. If you know who, if you're conservative, you know who the great one Mark Levine is, and Dennis Prager arguing with Charlie Kirk and some other folks on the right. Kirk is going to be very MAGA-like and saying like, why are you supporting Russia over Ukraine? Like this doesn't make sense. And they, hashed it out. And I want to say it was Levine. It might not have been. It might have been Gorka who was saying, well, if you ask yourself one question, what would Ronald Reagan do? Answer becomes crystal clear. And that's where I am. I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm the old guard Republican that we knew before Trump, and nothing's really changed for me. My party has shifted, but I haven't. Okay. Greg Terry said, I'm sipping coffee, resting, and watching the snowfall while listening to Dr. Gerdes. It's very relaxing. Yeah, I know. I put people to sleep. I understand. Um, Mike Combs says Russia is prime for Starlink. The largest continent in the world doesn't have the infrastructure for the internet access. Maybe that's it. I mean, it could be business interest, and I've heard similar that with business interest, it was as much about the resources that Russia has that he can get, mineral resources or something. But I just don't know, so I can't really say. Dave's life. By the way, I'm still going to come back to that question that you have about McConnell, if you can add a little bit more to it so I can answer it fully. But Dave's Life said the IL-76. Russia has said that there were two of them in the air at the time of the shoot down. Perhaps Ukraine got one, the one that came from over Iran, but the Russian incompetence identified it as a POW one. We really don't know. From what I hear from Greg and people that he knows on the ground, they're telling me like they don't know. They're like they don't understand. The facts are not clear yet. I've heard all kinds of things. I heard that it was one missile, that it was three missiles, that it was an explosion, that it was the Ukrainians, that it was the Russians that had friendly fire. I mean, I heard pretty much everything. And so I can't really, I mean, all I can tell you is the facts that we know is that a plane came down, it's on the ground. It seems like it was shot down, but for whatever reason, unnatural causes brought it down. We know that we've seen upwards of five bodies near the crash site. And you would think that if the Russians had more bodies, they would wave those around or make those pictures very clear. So you would think that kind of thing. And we also know that the Russians tend to lie a lot about, well, whatever. And because they lie, you can't really trust. And the Ukrainians have been tight-lipped, and so we just don't know. Okay, Paul Ironmonger, what are the chances of a court ruling preventing Trump from becoming president? Okay, so it's a really thorny issue, right? I want to defeat Trump at the ballot box because if you have a court ruling doing that, there's going to be half the country, well, not exactly half the country, a third of the country that's going to think that this election was stolen. I mean, it'll give them clear evidence in their minds that this was rigged, it was stolen, it was political persecution, it was right. Part of that is, and people I know on the other side are going to say, well, he did it. He's guilty. He should, he's not above the law. Fair. That's fair. So every other politician who has done things beyond the law, and every conservative or Republican or whatever that will say, well, what about Hillary? Because Hillary certainly didn't have her hands clean, as far as conservatives are concerned, didn't have her hands clean, and but nobody went after her. And so there's this terrible appearance of a double standard. And so you have to be really careful with that sort of thing. And I'm for everybody that's doing whatever crime being prosecuted for it. But you can't have a double standard, or it becomes a really problematic. If that kind of thing happens, and it's possible, I think it puts a lot into question about our political system because it'll cause mistrust in the same way that I think it's a bad idea to do the 300,000 or $300 billion grab of oligarch Russian money, because it undermines faith in the system. Um, okay, William Atheist. Obama's pick for the court was called illegitimate because he was in his final year of office. Oh, is that what you were asking about? But that was perfectly fine. Okay, yeah, yeah. I talked about that at the time in another context. So I'm happy to answer that. If is that the same one as the one from before? Is this? Uh, I'm hoping that that's the same question because I don't want to ignore the question earlier. Okay, yeah. So what happened with that was that was already baked into the political calculation. So and so I understand the Constitution pretty well. Like I did my dissertation on the leadership assumption of American statesmen during the Constitutional Convention and ratification debates. And what I was asking was, what were the founding fathers, the framers, thinking as they were creating the Constitution in terms of like what were their assumptions about leadership? And it turns out very heavy about power and like how to guard against power and that kind of thing. Okay, so you have the president gets to pick, but with advice and consent of the Senate. So the Senate has to confirm the pick. So this part of the you have some balances to things. So it can't be like one person just making decisions or one person screwing up the whole system or whatever. Um, okay. So you had a Republican majority that was voted in, and they weren't going to confirm him. Now they could have, it's possible, but just because Obama picks the guy doesn't mean that they have to confirm. And the Senate has not confirmed numerous picks in the past and said, start over, do it again. All they did was stall because because they had a numerical majority. And that situation was already baked into the situation when the Supreme Court justice stepped down. And it looks like a terrible travesty, but it could happen the other direction too. And if it happened the other direction too, Republicans would squawk about this, and Democrats would be like, "Seemed fine to me. Let them go to the next election." And so it's just it was within the rules or within the rules, within the setup of how the system actually works. It's kind of mm, I don't want to say a trick because that's not it. It's kind of a not the way that the founders were anticipating, but they could have just outright rejected them for they could have brought the person forward and outright rejected, and brought another one forward and outright rejected, and they could have done that as long as they wanted to because they held the majority in the Senate, and so they needed to have the majority to yeah. So that's what happened there. Now, if there was a democratically controlled Senate, no question, they could have run through as many Supreme Court justices as would have retired and no problem. And again, it can what cuts one way can cut the other way, and so you have to be careful with those sort of things. But yeah, I see it as that's they didn't break or violate anything in that process. So I hope that helps you understand what was going on with that. Okay, Garage Boy, could you explain how Russia USSR raided Ukrainian museums and church records and claimed it all to integrate into it as well as Russian history? I believe this is an extremely important factor. You're right. This is not my strength, but the way that the Russians seem to see things is that the world is Russia's, and Ukraine specifically is part of Russia, little Russia. Even the borderlands name or the way that they frame or try to understand Ukraine, they need it, but they see it as it's like this little component of them, not really. They're like the second class Russians, right? They're like, okay, they're part of us, but they're not really like the good Russians. And so they feel entitled to it. And but I can't really speak to that issue a whole lot. Um, okay, next. Oh, things keep popping up. Bruce Ingles, wouldn't the best solution be to return money to the oligarchs, but impose milestones to help make Ukraine whole under international? Okay, so with the frozen assets, the reason that I oppose it is not because we don't need money. In fact, in the um, uh, in they voted, I think it was 19-1 in committee to actually move toward seizing the frozen assets. But that won't happen for some time. It'll take a while to work out. This was just like 3 days ago that they voted 19-1 to bring it out of committee and move it to the floor. I think it's a terrible idea because of the undermining of the system. It's not because I like have any deep love for oligarchs or anything along those lines. They probably were shady in becoming oligarchs to begin with. But the message that you send is not just to the oligarchs or to Russia, it's to the rest of the world about if you put your money in dollar denominated currency or put it into American or Western banks, this could happen to you. And so we won't don't want to do that to our banking system. So Putin with, so oil used to be sold, Russian oil used to be sold in dollar denominated currency. And this goes back to post World War II. And it's also safer than buying and selling in the ruble because the ruble can fluctuate significantly. The dollar is a little bit safer, and so people were happy to do that. And Putin, "Oh, well, we're not going to use dollars anymore. We're going to trade in rubles." Okay, well, maybe he can make that work, but he didn't really undermine faith in the system as like you'll see a lot of American repeaters of Russian propaganda. You'll see this in RT all the time, and TASS and Pravda, talking about how the dollar is going to be destroyed by what Russia's doing and selling to the BRICS and selling oil. And they couldn't destroy the dollar, but we can. We can destroy the dollar by undermining faith in the system. And I think we're going to be stupid, and that's what we're going to do. I hope we don't. Um, What am I doing on Elite Match? You and your wife swingers? What is Elite Match? I'm imagining I'm being impersonated somewhere or evidence files is making up crap. But if you want to provide the link, I would be interested in going and looking and seeing what I'm allegedly doing. I'm about the most boring person that you know in that regard. I'm a big family man, like my books, prefer to be uh, going to my kids' basketball game or something than doing other activities. So, um, yeah, either you're a troll or there's somebody impersonating me, but I'm curious how that works. Professor, I know you don't want to speculate or mislead your audience. However, could you please share your opinion of the fate of General Gerasimov? Um, okay. So I got Gerasimov wrong because I was saying, hey, There are rumors that this is happening, and if this has happened, it's a big blow, and um, it seemed to line up pretty well with other things that had happened. Like in the same place a couple months before, you had the general that was, or admiral that was killed at the headquarters in Sevastopol. And the Russians were like, no, nothing really happened here. But yeah, it happened. And then they propped him up on like, or they had the picture in the live stream of him sitting there, like as if he was really part of the video conference. And so this is a trick that you can get into where you see things. Human beings are pretty terrible about this. You see things, you see patterns, and the patterns may or may not exist. And it's good when you have that pattern recognition and something does exist and you can actually make sense of what's going on. But sometimes the patterns don't actually exist, or you trick yourself into it. I think you'll see this a lot. So the Trump supporters are seeing certain patterns that the rest of us aren't seeing, that probably in some cases aren't there. We're seeing patterns of Trump's behavior that they're somewhat blind to. And you understand what I'm saying? Like that's the way it works. Okay, so I got that wrong by coming out too early. So I'm hearing about things on the ground. I am looking and seeing, okay, well, some things are publishing that this is potentially happening. And um, I jumped the gun too quickly and should have waited longer. But I was like, wow, if that's the case, and I put caveats to it. Do I think he's dead? I really honestly don't know. I So there's no use in saying that somebody's dead when they can just trot him out later on and prove that it's not the case. But I my thing was that I saw the pattern that seemed to fit the way that they operate, and then I seized on it beforehand with caveats, but still. And you know what? Um, I only bookended in that little video. I only bookended, "Hey, this could have happened. It appears that this could have happened," and it said, "Now, again, caveat, and if this happened, this is big." But all the rest of the content in between in that video was about, like, Gerasimov was the real deal. He was pointing out um, how the war should have worked. That he's the guy behind the Gerasimov doctrine. He was sidelined by Putin early on in the war because he didn't think this was a good strategy, which it turned out not to be. And Shoigu was trusted, but Gerasimov wasn't. So there was all the other stuff about it. Just yeah, I would say probably alive because I can't prove otherwise. And so yeah. Okay. William popped up again. He was the super chat guy earlier. The point I was attempting to make was if the reasons that McConnell gave on the court issue with the hypocrisy he showed, for sure he is more than prepared to throw the border deal away. No, so William, that's a great point. Not because of the past hypocrisy or whatever, but they're actually now talking about just forgetting about the border deal and going back to the Israel, Ukraine, Indo-Pacific bill as a standalone. So all this would have been wasted time for nothing. And that's what they were considering 2 days ago when they were talking about how Trump was wanting this to be his issue to run on and whatever. I'm thinking, okay, so that's just bad to leave. If it is a problem, which it is, to leave it to fester for Trump to run on. Just try to solve it as much as you can. But they're talking about a separate deal now for just military stuff. By the way, Indo-Pacific is going to shape this as well. And so the US military is really looking at China and the threat that China could be, and they're reshaping to become more prepared for what China could do potentially. Um, and like, particularly with Taiwan. So I think that is actually going to be even a bigger potential issue for Ukraine than anything else that we've described so far. That not just the possibility of China doing something, but that the US military is reshaping that direction. Okay. How can Trump be a political leader when he has been done by the courts for sexual misbehavior? His fines are millions of dollars, and he's using MAGA supporters' money. So that's if so, that's well dodgy. Okay, so yes, it is dodgy, um, but okay. So it's a good question, but from the outside looking in, you're not seeing some of the details, the nuance here. He was done by the court in your term. That sounds cool the way you say stuff. Um, but it was a civil trial. It was not a criminal trial. There's a difference between that. So civil has this liability where they can go after him and make him pay these fines. Criminal would put him in jail, and that's a different thing. If he was criminally found for this, and you can be found civilly guilty of something and not criminally guilty. And if he was criminally, that would be a felon, and then that would eliminate him. Again, that would be a very dangerous precedent because for one reason or another, people believe that he's being set up or whatever. I'm just telling, I'm just relaying. When I tell you, here's what Republicans think, I'm not saying that this is necessarily correct. I'm saying they see it this way. So with the trial that just happened yesterday, I am sure I did this like little poll. I'm going to put out a video about it briefly. But yeah, you see very big differences between the way that Republicans think and the way liberals think, and you specifically between even the way that old guard conservatives like me think, and the way that MAGA Republicans think. There's a big difference there, and so yeah, but he had to pay this fine, but he is not a felon officially. And so okay, so Colorado took him off the ballot on the grounds that he's an insurrectionist, but he was never found guilty as an insurrectionist. Now I know that you're like, well, but he is. Remember January 6th. Okay, you got to be found guilty. You're innocent until proven guilty, right? And so you've got to be found guilty by a court of law. Or he could have been impeached and removed. Now, he was impeached. That means he's charged, but he wasn't removed in the sense that the Senate didn't, there wasn't enough numbers in the Senate to say, yes, he's removed. He shouldn't be in office anymore or be eligible to serve anymore. Neither of those things happened. So what's going to happen to Colorado and one other state is that's going to be reversed. And I would hope that the Supreme Court reverses 9-0 because this is huge. Again, you're looking at the faith. Okay. If I have a dollar on the back, it's like talking about it's a full faith and credit of the United States government, right? You're looking at the faith in the system, in the political system, and you don't want to intervene in the political system. Like I get that you want to intervene in the political system, right? But ideally, you don't want to intervene in the political system. You want the will of the people to prevail. Now, you want to shape the will of the people so that it prevails properly, and you select candidates that are going to be healthy. But if it looks like a kangaroo court doing something, or it looks like a banana republic, it'll be very, very bad. You just don't want to go to that place. Okay. Is a war with China more likely to happen if Ukraine isn't supported firmly? Okay, so that's where I land, right? I think that one of the reasons that you should support Ukraine. Now, the first reason is because there was a terrible injustice, and that you would allow an authoritarian government to roll over a fledgling democracy, an imperfect democracy, sure, but trying to be more democratic, trying to be more European. I think that to allow that to stand is bad. But I think you're also like President Xi was watching, and I think he was in the first few weeks of the war far more interested in, if Putin can have that, maybe I should be taking Taiwan than he is now. And Russia pants themselves on the world stage. I mean, they really have a bad look. I mean, before the war, when their tanks were rolling in, I was thinking like, oh no, like and Zelensky's staying. Eh, oh, like I just couldn't imagine that what are we on day 703, 702, something like that. Like I couldn't imagine that we would be here at this point. That Ukraine would still be able to be holding on against overwhelming odds like that. So, but it turns out they weren't that tough, and they had all these other issues and corruption and what like there's it's bad, but it wasn't like they were just going to crush Ukraine. Like okay, so Putin is setting kind of a bad example for other dictators in the world. And to the degree that you support Ukraine and send a message that these accepted international laws and rules are not to be violated, then it makes it less likely for others to follow. And that includes Xi. And Xi is I think I've talked about this a lot early on. Like it was Russia as the big brother and China as a little brother. And over time, China didn't go anywhere really, but Russia just kind of looked worse and worse. And I think China's becoming the big brother in that relationship. Okay, somebody's talked about what is 9-0. John Larkin said, "Thank you for the explanation. What is 9.0? 9-0 means unanimity. There's 9 justices on the Supreme Court, and if they have like a 4-5 decision, that's different because the court's very split than if they have all 9 justices saying that should not stand. It sends a very clear message when they do something like that. That yeah, this. You don't want to challenge that kind of message later on as a precedent. Okay, and yeah, Paul was commenting on that. That they were talking about unanimity in the court. Um, Let's see, what other questions do we oh, here's something popped up. And Antoine Robert, what really irritates me lately is that NATO BS about remaining and preparing for a big war against Russia. NATO could have crushed this. And I keep saying this, but the big story is that we came with too little, too late. And there's an analog here. What happened with Serbia and Kosovo and the breakup of the former Yugoslavia? Um, on Thanksgiving, I was watching a multi-part documentary about the breakup of Yugoslavia because I didn't want to watch football. I decided to watch that documentary, and I was so struck by how by the time that uh, European powers actually intervened, like so much had gone wrong, so many bad things had happened that like it was too little, too late. It was just and that's where we are with Ukraine. We're very slow in reacting and doing what was right for Ukraine and the world. Like what's happening in Ukraine, Zelensky's been very clear about this. They're fighting in Ukraine so it doesn't spill over, but they're fighting for Western values that like it's happening there, but it's for everyone. And he's right. Okay. They're under no threat and didn't send much stuff to Ukraine, which is getting pounded. That's right. They just it's like they don't have the will to make this happen better. I just if you look at Russia and its GDP and its actual power. And like Russia looks huge. 10 time zones, of course, it's huge. But their actual ability compared to Ukraine is pretty significant. But their ability compared to NATO is not so significant. But their ability against a NATO who's kind of asleep and not really doing like if NATO decided it's on, here we go, right? It would be a whole different ball game. And they talk about it like Solioff. I was about to do a video about Solioff yesterday, and one thing got in front of another Trump's thing yesterday, and so maybe I'll do that today. Was well, we're still at war with NATO, and no, you're not really at war with NATO. It's not. That's not what's going on. Okay, Professor G, do you personally avoid buying products of war sponsored by companies such as Philip Morris, PepsiCo, Mars, Procter and Gamble? Uh, Okay, so the question is, companies that, if I understand this, are, still doing business with Russia. If I know that they're still doing business with Russia, I would avoid it. Um, I don't know that I know everyone that is there. There are a number of indexes about that. I haven't spent a lot of time on that, and there's only so much time in a day. But if I'm aware of that, I certainly wouldn't do that. I want to support Ukraine any way that I can, and I've tried. Uh, yeah, so here in my channel, I try to really help people understand what's going on, provide context. And I was working with Greg in this fundraiser more recently, and that's a new addition. And that's because I felt for a year and a half like, man, I wish I could do more. I wish I could have some kind of greater impact. Excuse me. And then some kind of greater impact. And I'm like, wow, this guy's doing it. I was like in awe, like this guy's a rock star. He's raised $250,000, and like I can work with him, and we can, right. And I've gone down a third line of effort, and that is, like, here's how to write your congressman. Like, by the way, if you haven't written how many of you have actually, if you're American, have written your congressman? Write your congressman, write your senator. I did a second video talking about, if you write your senators, now's the optimal time. Okay. So, go back to those videos. They're really important. It takes you like 5 minutes, and they don't really care about your argument so much as that you have registered your support for this or you registered your support for that. And they're going to look at the tallies, and they're going to be like, you know what? A higher percentage of people want me to do this. And so that can sway them some. Now, they're not going to be, you're not going to, sway them from deep principles of, well, I was radically pro-life or pro-choice, and I'm going to switch to the other side. That probably is not going to happen. But Ukraine wasn't one of these deeply something. Something that popped up, and we all had to kind of adjust to and go, now how do we deal with this? Well, this seems to be the best way forward. And so it's not this deep philosophical grounding rooted something. I think you can sway people on this issue far more easily than some other issues. So please, if you haven't already gone and written your legislator, it'll take you like 5 minutes. I show you in the video what the steps are. It's very easy. And don't worry about so much what you say than that you say it. Okay. The big cat, props to Gerdes for what he's doing for Ukraine. Totally didn't understand the GOP mindset, but you're doing a lot of good. Yeah, that's another thing. I want you to understand each other's mindset. I get why liberals think that they do about the GOP. We've pantsed ourselves too, right? But you have to understand that they think not like you thought that they think, but they really do think about this way. And if you understand that they think this way, then now you can talk to them in a way that they will hear you and hopefully persuade some back. So, yeah, okay. Dennis Tate, my senator knows and cares my opinion. Nice letter back. Good. President, let's see. Professor G, can you address my top question? Republican president eliminate Ukraine aid, money, arms, Russian sanctions that lead to fall of Ukraine. I don't know. Did you have a question earlier? If you can copy and paste and pop it in, Kitty, heck, I'll look for you and try to answer whatever. As far as I'm seeing, I'm going to come back and see what your full question is, and then I'll answer somebody else in the meantime. William G, atheist number one. I'll never understand GOP supporters take McConnell. Trump threw his wife under the bus, yet he still supports Trump. I just don't get them. Okay, so no. This is a normal. It seems almost weird to call something so abnormal normal, but it's normal in politics. Like, watch what happened. So Governor DeSantis was just railing about Trump and, Trump this and Trump that. He drops out, and now he's cozying right up to him. Why? Because Trump looks like the presumptive nominee. It appears that way. Now, I told my wife this yesterday, and I think this is right. I think if I could be anyone in the country right now, I'd want to be Nikki Haley because all Nikki has to do is get to every primary. She can lose a lot along the way. And all she has to do is she has a fairly high probability that Trump either sabotages himself or something else goes wrong, or the country wakes up and goes, you know what? We can get him in the primary, but can we get him through the general election? And we actually want to beat Biden. So this might not be the best plan. So she's the only person positioned for if Trump self destructs or something happens to him or the country, Republican voters wake up or whatever. She's perfectly positioned. That's who I would want to be if I could be anyone in the country right now. Um, and yeah, but as far as the mindset, yeah, they cozy up to people with power. People do this everywhere around the world. And McConnell, I think, still smarts a little from what McConnell uh is almost a perfect political animal, and that's not really a compliment. He understands politics and he maneuvers deftly. He's been in the Senate for like 40 years or something. I mean, and so he's just maneuvering his way through things, but it's not because he likes Trump so much as he's trying to figure out the reality and trying to score the political points. But he doesn't really like Trump. Like there are some that don't like. Remember, um, 2016 cycle, Trump was making fun of Ted Cruz's wife or saying some like really nasty things about that too. And Ted Cruz is generally pro-Trump kind of talking points as well. So this is kind of a normal thing. That's how they unfortunately deal with power. You very rarely see someone who will be like, "Nope, I lost, but I'm not supporting that guy." And it's a hard thing to not support the guy in your own party. And I know I'm going to get this kind of thing. Well, are you going to support Trump? No, I'm voting for Haley when Haley comes to town. And then after that, it doesn't really matter what happens in my state. And no, it won't be voting for Trump there. But it doesn't really matter because my state is going to. The way that it works in the United States is each state, the total from each state gets thrown to whichever candidate, right? So it won't really matter. My state's very conservative, and so it will go to whoever the Republican is. It's just the way it'll work. So I get to have my vote in the primary, and okay, so I vote for my wife or Mickey Mouse or um, whatever. But so that's how that will play out. Okay, at any rate. Let's see. Two-part question. If so where's Kitty? Did Kitty Hawk or Kitty Hack? Okay, two-part question. If a Republican candidate is elected, will the U.S. reduce aid at that point? That UA to the point that the Ukraine falls as EU can't fill the arms gap, especially if Trump were to withdraw from NATO. I don't think Trump's going to withdraw from NATO. I think Trump was looking at that and saying and threatening that in order to get them to pay their fair share, as he was explaining. You got to understand, NATO still, I was 6 months ago, 9 months ago, still was not actually up to 2% military for many different countries. I remember reading this article like, okay, you're knee deep in a war with Ukraine and you're still not up to your 2% military obligation, guys. Come on. Like what do you need to have happen? I think that the possibility that Trump could be elected, it has put European leaders on notice that they're going to have to step up in their own backyard, and that's correct. And because of that, Britain, Germany has really stepped up. Britain really stepped up. France is starting to really step up. They're taking ownership of the problem, and I think that's really good. Now, here's the thing. There was a debate in the Senate yesterday or day before yesterday where they were talking about this, and a number of senators were saying like, why are we paying for Social Security pensions for Ukrainians? This doesn't make any sense, and I'm not going to support that. And so I get that, but what the U.S. can provide are weapons, and the U.S. should be providing the weapons, and we let Europe pay the bills. and let us provide weapons, and because we have those in spades that could be helpful. Um, I think that's a good way to make that to skin that cat. Okay, now it's no surprise to anyone that the election's in November and that a new president comes in January next year. So you have a year, Europe, to get your act together, to gear up to support Ukraine. And if you don't, shame on you. Now, we should. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but shame on you. You have ample time to step up to fill in whatever the void is. I'm pretty sure a deal will be done and they'll have support for the rest of the year, or for a pretty good chunk of the year that will go to Ukraine and from the US. But come on, step up, Europe. You really need to. Okay. And then yeah, if Trump were to withdraw from NATO, I don't see the NATO part. I don't see that happening. Um, Okay, Ronnie Varkin says, seen the last minutes of Bill Mayer's show comparing the Constitution to Brazil's, comparing January 6th with January 8th in Brazil. I haven't seen that, so I'll try to get to it, but I have not seen it. Bill Maher's show comparing the Constitution. Okay, well, I'll look for that. Adam Brown says, how do you feel about what Bolton said about Trump's pullout from NATO? Trump talks a lot about things that he doesn't actually intend to do because he's trying to shape with the way that he talks. So I don't see him pulling out of NATO. William G. Atheist, who come up with that 2% number? Sorry, but I think it's BS. No, that's actually NATO stipulation. At a minimum of 2% military for all of NATO. Now, you should be, increasing that because you need to be supporting Ukraine. In time of war, I don't care if it's 10%. In time of peace, I want the funds to go to education, healthcare, or anything but military. Okay, well, that's just part of being in NATO. I mean, that's what the NATO guidelines are. Trump has been very clear to never help Europe with or without NATO. I don't think that that's fair. I think Trump was telling NATO, pay your. Ironically, here's I try to give you a context, right? Um, you ask your average Republican who's paying attention to this, and they will tell you that Trump actually has helped significantly by putting pressure on NATO to step up and pay their fair share, which actually got them more positioned to support Ukraine than where they otherwise would have been. And I think that's actually fair, indirectly, not intentionally, but I think that's fair. That's actually what has happened. All right, we're at about an hour or so. I'll answer just a couple more questions, and then we'll be done. Okay. Uh, I feel like Americans' position on Europe is. This is Master of None saying, I feel like Americans' position on Europe is, if you can't deal with clowns like Russia, why should anyone take you seriously? Europe does need to step up dramatically and can. Right. I think that there is that's particularly strong within the populists. Now, I'm not an internationalist. I know that some of you think that I am. I'm not a moderate conservative. I'm a real full-throated conservative. But I'm not an internationalist, and I'm not a populist isolationist either. I do recognize that if you're going to play in the world, you need to, and you're going to have a leadership role, you need to step into that leadership role. But the isolationist populists that support Trump, these people are going to say exactly what was said there. Okay. Europe needs to step up. It's their backyard. Why are we spending all this on that? And the reason is because if you're going to be a leader, you have to be a leader, even when it's not a pleasant thing, right? In the same way, I own my house, and if the hot water heater breaks, I have to fix it, right? I'm not going to blame somebody else or ignore it and just not have water. I'm going to do what I need to do. Okay, two more questions, and then we'll be done. Trump is saying so many different things that everybody can find a position that they agree with. What he does is something quite different. That's not a question. That's more of a statement. But there's something to that. I think. I think that's right. It's like a YouTube lyric. You can read whatever you want to into them in some ways. Um, I think you're onto something with that. William G. Atheist, thank you, Professor. I forgive you for being conservative. Well, I'm not asking for forgiveness, but thank you for being kind enough and gracious enough. I hope, like, when you're watching this, you're not thinking that I'm like, well, but these conservatives, they're are no, conservatives are right. I'm a conservative. These Republicans, get that? Um, the I hope you're not thinking that I'm saying when I'm explaining how Trump populist MAGA supporters think that I'm arguing for them. I'm just trying to say, look, you have to have their perspective and understand why they think this way. And if you, it's weird for me to have to be the one translating, but that's yeah, understand where they are, and then you can have some kind of hopefully you can build a bridge and help them cross over. But that's where they are. Okay. Last couple of comments here. Kitty Heck says, Professor G, how likely will Ukraine fall instead of stalemate? Russia keeps occupied land. If Ukraine falls, it's World War III because Russia will continue to Moldova, Lithuania, Poland. It is possible that they could continue, and that's kind of a nightmare scenario. We don't want that to happen. How likely is it? I think in the short term, some sort of not a lot of movement. In the longer term, I'm starting to come over to a position where I think that the war very well could be won when a acute triggering event in Russia happens that causes it to fold, and that will be triggered by, I think, extra pressure. And again, my crystal ball is murky. This is just what I feel. I don't think it's so much, and it could be one on the ground. It could be negotiated, but I think it'll. I'm leaning toward. If I had to give probabilities, the higher probability is an acute event in Russia causes them to fold because of what was going on there. But that's because of external pressure due to the war in Ukraine, sanctions to a small degree, and other geopolitical events. I could be wrong, though. I mean, maybe they break through and cut off Crimea and take Crimea and then sweep up, and who knows? But that's a hard slog and it's a long way, and I'm just not sure how that's going to happen. And it could be devastatingly because of a stalemate that turns into a compromise where Russia gets to keep stuff. I hope not. I absolutely hope not, because that would be hugely unjust. But okay. Unjust, I guess, is the better word. Okay, last comments here. Ronnie Vacan says Europe is putting pressure on saboteurs like Orban and Slovakia. Also, big demonstrations. Poland getting back harder into the game. Yeah, they really do. So there's a strength to the EU that's also its weakness. Here's a guiding principle when you're thinking about something. Think about what it does, and then think about its opposite. What I mean by that, the strength of the EU is its weakness. The size of Russia is its strength, but it's also its weakness. And I'll unpack both of these, and then we'll be done. So in the EU, they could really coalesce around something and then be huge and support Ukraine, and it would be really difficult for Russia. But they have to have a majority, not a majority, a unanimity to do pretty much anything. And because of that, the likelihood that they're going to actually capitalize on their strength is very small. Russia is a huge state, but Ukraine can hit this oil well and that gas export platform and this other oil production facility pretty much with impunity because it's so big that it's hard to be able to defend everything. And so, yeah, your strength can also be your weakness. And if you think in those kind of terms, like you start to see things that you otherwise might not. Folks, there's 233 of you here in this live stream, and I'm grateful that you care enough about Ukraine to be able to be here and to listen to me. We've been over an hour now, and I just want to say you're awesome. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for caring. Thank you for listening, for writing your legislators. Thank you for giving to Greg's fund so that he can be doing. And you can watch these things like as he's delivering these sleds. This will be like the next step, or items are coming in, or we're getting mine clearing device, not mine clearing, metal detectors so that they can not step on these mines and things like there's, it doesn't matter if you're doing this, that, or the other thing. If you're doing something that's helping move the cause, you're doing something awesome. And thank you so much. Yep, Greg, do you want to say anything quickly before we go? If you do, type that in, and I'll pass that along. When are you going to be live again tonight? So Greg just popped up again. So if you're, thank you, he said, thank you all, but you didn't tell us. So you're going to be live streaming tonight, Greg? Yes, tonight live. So go over to @GregTerry Experience and see what he's been doing. He's doing some incredible work. I'm privileged to be a part of it, as are a number of other YouTubers that are we're just trying to do what we can to help, just like you are. And thank you so much for your time. All right. Have a good rest of the day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.